And so, on the topic of decentralization, this is a much talked about subject nowadays, especially among the youth. The onslaught of cryptocurrency, especially, has brought all of this into limelight. And so, the operative word here is deinstitutionalization and decentralization. And so, what's happening is these ideas are also being applied on religion, but we'll come to that when we come to that. Primarily, the idea is that institutions are all bad, just black and white. You're plain painting all of it in black and white. So this is good and this is evil. This is good, this is bad. Institutions are all bad. Centralization is all bad. Government is all bad. And so we need to decentralize stuff. And let's start with the perhaps the most powerful entity in the world today, which is economics, which is the finance. So let's take the power away from the institution of the banking system, from the institution of banks, and let's distribute this power into the hands of the very community, into the hands of the individuals. This is something that has been tried and tested, and with a little bit of history of success behind it. I mean, one example that comes to mind is that of the vape industry, when it wanted to create the e-cigarette and it wanted to distribute that to the community, and the big tobacco, it came after it big time, where it was decentralized. So you had small businessmen, small people taking the initiative, doing these startups and whatnot, and then selling these e-juices, making them, getting them made from companies or making them at home at some point in time, and selling the e-cigarette devices and whatnot. And it worked pretty well. But the point here is, and this is something that I've been wanting to discuss, something that we need to understand is that it's not all black and white. Decentralization might seem like a good concept. However, centralization is not always bad. The problem herein lies with man-made rules, with man-made governments, with man-made laws. And so obviously I'm coming from a religious point of view here. So when you have the morality that is subjective, when you have the laws that are made by these human beings who have subjective morality, subjective standards, you would run into this problem. And at some point in time, somewhere along the way, you would see how the corruption seeps in, because the corruption will always seep in. The problem of evil is a much talked subject in philosophy, in psychology, in sociology. And I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a philosopher. I have never made a claim that I know anything about these very specialized academic fields. But I have read enough papers and books that I can at least talk about these subjects intelligently somewhat. And so what you will have at the end of the day, if you read about history, if you read these academic papers, if you read these books, you read Das Kapital, you read Capitalism's Achilles heel, books like that. Even if you pick up his End of History and The Last Man, you'll find that intellectuals, academics, people with knowledge, people of knowledge, scholars, they have always talked about this problem that quote unquote is a very human problem. We have limitations, and this is not something that is dealt with just by the religion. It's also dealt with by the intellectuals, by the academics. It's also dealt with by people of knowledge, like I said. And so we have this huge problem of evil, the problem of evil in this world. You can't eradicate that. You just cannot. You just cannot end the corruption. I mean, it's naivete. I often hear my youth talking about the corruption, and that they want to uproot the corruption, they want to stop the corruption, they want to punish the corrupt. That's not how the world works. In fact, it's not just the people who are in power who are corrupt. Every single one of us is corrupt, and we indulge in corruption wherever we find that leeway, wherever we think that we would get away with it. I mean, think about it. You lay down on your bed tonight before you go to sleep. Think about your day. How many times you took advantage of the circumstances, where these circumstances were in your favor, and you thought you'd get away with something that is, let's say, morally questionable somewhat. So it happens to all of us, to every single human being. We're all, we all have these seeds of corruption. And so the governments are made by human beings. They operate on laws made by human beings, right? And that therein is the problem. So the institution itself, the concept, the theoretical concept of institution, the theoretical concept of centralization in itself is not bad. Actually, without it, only chaos will ensue. That's not just rhetoric. That's not a tool that the governments employ. That's not just that. There is truth to it. And when we look at religions, major religions that are there in the world today, talk about Judaism, talk about Hinduism, talk about Islam, we see that there are guidelines given by God, whichever God these religions believe in. And those instructions are meant to keep human beings in line. Those instructions that are supposedly by God, and I'm using the word supposedly because I am trying to address people who are non-religious as well. I know some of you here don't adhere to a particular religion. And so whichever God these religions adhere to, you'll find the instructions from that God. And these instructions are meant to keep human beings in check, keep human beings in line, keep that corruption in check, keep that morality on the straight path. And so when you hear this narrative of decentralization, you should question it first of all. Now there are narratives for decentralization which are, in my opinion, justified, and decentralization should happen in those cases, in some of those cases. But then there are narratives, there's a push for decentralization based on fraudulent intentions. I mean, look at Celsius, for example. For those of you who don't know about it, it was a huge company, a huge crypto company that offered a wallet and offered an interest rate of, I guess, 8.5% on your savings, which was huge. And a lot of, I guess, it raised something around 30 billion or some whereabouts of that financial amount. And so it's a huge amount. 30 billion is a huge amount. And so, or 30 million, I mean, I don't exactly recall, but along those lines. And so then after a few months, I think after a year and a half or so, it filed for bankruptcy. It's a fraud, Ponzi scheme. And you also find it in OneCoin. OneCoin was very big, even in Pakistan, here in my country. It went viral. And then you suddenly realize, these guys didn't even have any cryptocurrency to offer in the first place. It was just an MLM, a Ponzi scheme. And well, let's talk about Silicon Valley's biggest fraud ever. And that was by the company very famous company actually in its time. It rose to heights of power and popularity very quickly. It was called Theranos. And the CEO of that company, I'm forgetting her name, I don't know, something. Netflix has a series on her, I think. And that the CEO said that you can get your blood tested just from a drop of your blood. And so they made these portable devices, medical devices, which were supposedly able to check your blood and give you back a report. And these gadgets were just as big as a desktop printer. And so, people went mad about it. It went viral and everybody invested. She even got, I don't know, maybe the president of United States or whom not, to invest into this and raised a lot of money. And then, it transpired that it was all a fraud. And so, the recent history is full of that. Whenever somebody says this word, decentralization, or uses the term deinstitutionalization, it should raise a red flag for you. That's all I'm saying. Just think about it. Why are they saying that? If their concerns are legitimate, they're based on facts, they're based on because we all know governments are not good, right? At the end of the day, they don't care about us. That's a fact. But just to get up and say, there shouldn't be any government, that's madness, right? That's, you're calling for chaos. Okay, no government. What are you going to do? You're going to have warlords. You're going to have people with guns taking care of themselves. Duh. So, you should always question this term whenever it pops up. You should always look at the context in which somebody is using this or proposing this. And one of the examples that I often quote for my students and I often try to elaborate on is the example of the hadith rejectors, the example of the Quranists in my religion, Islam. There is this sect that says that tries to propagate this narrative of decentralization and deinstitutionalization and say that Islam has been corrupted by institutions. It has been institutionalized, it has been centralized, and that is the reason that it has been corrupted. So we should delegate this so-called power of interpretation to each of the community members. So they should all have this book, Quran, and they should all treat it as any other text, as any other literary or intellectually written text, any work of art or any work of intellectual art, intellectual scholarship. They should treat it as one, and they should interpret it in whichever way they deem fit. They should have this authority to interpret the verses of the holy book. For example, take Tanakh. Like, people one day came up with this idea that we don't believe in the institution, the Jewish institutions, and we want to interpret the Tanakh, we want to interpret the Old Testament the way we like. So that's what they have done with the Quran. They say we don't believe in any other authority. We don't believe in centralization. We don't believe in institutionalization, because the centralization of Islam is through the prophethood of the last and final messenger, Muhammad bin Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is the central figure for Islam. And so they want to decentralize it. They want to decentralize the book. They want to decentralize the religion, and the narrative is because it's all bad. The institutions are all bad. The governments, the so-called Muslim governments that came, they corrupted everything that we find today in Islam. The academia, the institution of academia, was all corrupt. Islam has been corrupted by the institutions, by the centralization and whatnot, and so let's decentralize the holy book and go mad about it. And so it's very fishy, yeah. And so when you look at it, the institution of academia, for example, the universities, the institutions that have these checks and balances in place for scholarship, like to determine what is scholarly, what is not scholarly. These are necessary centralizations. I mean, for example, think about a family. The basic unit of any society is a family, and family cannot work without centralization, right? I mean, you have two people at the center of a family, right? What is a family? Where you have two people at the center of the family, that's a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, a father and a mother, right? So it's centralization at that level, even at that very basic level. And then you have centralization working in every facet of your life. Everything works through that. It could be bad, yeah. I mean, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if you take that centralization and you abuse it, it becomes bad. Yeah, sure. So like I said, it's not all black and white. But when you have institutional checks and balances in place which are working, which are actually ordered also by Allah, by the Creator, when you have the Quran saying times and again, whatever the Prophet gives you, take it. Whatever he forbids you from, leave it. So that is the centralization ordered by Allah Himself. And so you should look at it. Just keep an open mind. You don't have to believe me or be influenced by me. You don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to blindly follow me or anything. I'm not asking you to do any of that. All I want you to do is think for yourselves. Just read up on these things, read some books, read some papers, sit down, think about it. The concept of decentralization, the concept of deinstitutionalization, mostly is in today's world is done by frauds because they want to rob you of your money, of your intellectual property and whatnot. And most of these people who cry wolf, most of these people who cry for decentralization and deinstitutionalization, they are frauds, man. They are working on Ponzi schemes. And it's the same with the sect of Quranists, with the sect of, with the sect of the Hadith rejectors. It's the same with that. It's the same with them. They're frauds, man. Just think about it. Sit down and think about it. Read up on it. We have a history in Islam. We have a rich history of academic, scholarly inquisitions. We have a diverse legacy. We have this diverse. I'm looking for a word here that could best describe what I want to say. We have a diverse history. Let's say that we have extreme diversity in our intellectual tradition. And so when people say, "Oh, but you have so many sects," they don't realize that when you have academic differences, these don't make you sects. This actually shows the intellectual girth, the intellectual vigor that is present in your history, in your tradition. And we have an extremely rich 1400 years, spanning 1400 years history, which you could dive into. It would take a lifetime to actually go through all of that, maybe multiple lifetimes, but you can definitely in today's internet-driven world, you can definitely dive into it and get a summary of all of that, get to know of all of that. We have two denominations in Islam, the Shia denomination and the Sunni denomination. These are not sects, these are denominations. Please, these are not sects. These are two denominations of Islam, Shia and Sunni. And both of these denominations, they have a rich history, rich, diverse intellectual history. And so if somebody comes along and says they want to do away with all of that, I just want you to question that. I just want you to question their motives. I just want you to look at it with an analytical eye, with an analytical mind, with an analytical, logical thinking mind, and just read up on these things, make up your own mind, form your own ideas. And yeah, basically, that's what I wanted to say. Um, yeah, a lot of times, I have this back and forth with the young kids, with my students and my youth. And a lot of times I'm just telling them the exact same things that I'm telling you. I'm saying, don't follow me. I'm not telling you to follow me blindly. I'm not telling you to take my word for it. But at least, guys, think about it. Nowadays, the youth really falls head over heels by just the very mention of the term decentralization, deinstitutionalization. I guess it titillates them a little bit at some level, at some intellectual level, because really what these frauds are selling at the very deepest and base level is the idea of power, that power that you have always thought only the institutions have, only the central government has. You can taste that too. You can have that power too. You can be the prophet. A'udhu billah. You can be the prophet. You can interpret the Quran yourself. You don't need the prophet. You don't need anyone else. You're as powerful as the prophethood itself. I mean, ma'adallah, a'udhu billah. And so at the very base level, there is this idea of power. That's their main fraud. So just think about that, guys. And yeah, inshallah, we'll talk about it more some other time. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.